Hey guys, MichaelBtheGameGenie here, and on today's video we're doing something a little bit new for me because we're taking a look at the recently released Game Boy on Nintendo Switch Online, and specifically the 9 launch games that came with the online platform and ranking them using Tier Maker. And we're going to do that right after this. So that's right guys, today we're going to be taking a look at the 9 launch titles that came with the online platform of Game Boy on Nintendo Switch Online and ranking them using Tier Maker. I know what you guys are thinking, ranking using Tier Maker? That's so 2022. Hey, I didn't do any last year, give me a break. Anyways, before we get started with the video, I want to say thank you so much to everybody for watching this video. I always appreciate the support, and if you're new to the channel, you like what you see, go ahead, subscribe. Click the bell for notifications, all that YouTube jazz. So guys, you're going to have to be a little patient with me. This is my first time using Tier Maker, my first time doing a list of this nature, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently than other people do it, at least I hope I will, because I'm going to be going over each game, giving a little mini review and explaining why I put them in the tier that they're going. First off, let's start right with the first game on this list, Game & Watch Gallery 3. I'm going to have to admit to you that I didn't get very excited when I saw this was one of the launch titles coming to Nintendo Switch Online Game Boy, because I had never played one of the Game & Watch galleries before, so I didn't have any inclination on what it actually was. I assumed that it immediately would just be the old Game & Watch games ported onto a Game Boy cart, and if you're not familiar with Game & Watch games, they're a lot like the Tiger Electronic games. So basically there was some stuff already pre-rendered images on screen, and you were basically controlling changes in the image on screen in order to make it seem like a game. These games were super simplistic, some were fun, but they didn't add a lot of value realistically. Little did I know they had actually done remade copies of these games with beautiful graphics, updated gameplay, and actually made a bunch of fun mini games. I wouldn't doubt this is eventually what started the whole WarioWare line of games that we got in the very near future. This is actually a surprising amount of fun for little mini games, and I actually recommend this game. So guys, Game & Watch Gallery is actually pretty fun. I'm not going to give it a very super high score, but with what I experienced while playing it, I am actually going to place it here in the C tier. It's good enough to play, certainly not a bad game to add to the list, a lot of fun mini games, but definitely not one of the highest ranked games for the Game Boy on the Nintendo Switch Online. Moving on, we have an absolute cult classic, the packing game with the original Game Boy that most people have, Tetris. I think if you're around my age range at one point or time, you definitely played Tetris on the Game Boy, and this may in fact be the definitive version of the game. I don't know why, it just feels right. I had so much fun as a kid playing Tetris, of course as a packing game. It was nearly perfect. You would want a Mario game or you would want something else, but Tetris just made sense. It was a game the entire family could play and spoke to more than just the male demographic. I remember one of the big things about Tetris was how excited my mom was to play it, and we would always take it to the cabin with us on weekends where we didn't have power and play Game Boy all weekend, and I can obviously tell you my mom ate up most of our batteries playing Tetris. It's a very simplistic puzzler. I think everybody in the world has played it. It doesn't need too much of an explanation, but basically you drop the blocks and line up in patterns, try to get your highest scores, and move on to the levels. Each level the difficulty increases very slightly until it gets to a point where the blocks are moving very fast and you really are unable to tell what's coming next. I love Tetris. This is a very, very good game. Of course, Tetris is owned by the Tetris company, so Nintendo had to pull a couple strings to get this to actually be on the Nintendo Switch Online, but honestly, if they didn't include Tetris, it would have been a huge miss. So guys, while I think Tetris is a definite must and a ton of fun, I would rank it as a B Game Boy game. It's a great puzzler, one that everybody in the family could play, And it's not just a game that males love, even though there's this rumor out there that females have difficulty with spatial ability. I will tell you right now, most females love Tetris. Doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl, it's a game anybody can play. It's a lot of fun. And of course, where it was the packing game with the original Game Boy, it had to be included with the launch offerings for the Nintendo Switch Online Game Boy. So Tetris is going in the B rank. Anyways, guys, moving on, let's talk about a very interesting game that they included with the Nintendo Switch Online. One I wouldn't have foresaw in a million years. Alone in the Dark for the Game Boy Color. Alone in the Dark is a cult classic survival horror game that you may remember playing on PlayStation, PC, and other various consoles, but one you don't think about very often is the offering on the Nintendo Game Boy Color. And believe me, if there's an episode out there of Stop Skeletons from Fighting Punching Weight on survival horror on the Game Boy Color, Alone in the Dark has probably been on one of those episodes. This is one of those games that you're all familiar with playing, like Myst, the original D game. It's one of those kind of like point and click adventures, first person perspective. I don't know how they managed to put this on the Game Boy Color. Obviously, this was a technical marvel at its time as you move from different pre-rendered backgrounds, moving your character along the screen, picking up items, going to different fight stages on the screen. It's essentially a lot like Resident Evil, Sans the Zombies. You go into this abandoned island and, try to find out what happened to your partner. It's a great survival horror game. However, the Game Boy Color version is a little bit lacking in a lot of areas. I don't necessarily know why this was included as one of the launch offerings for the Nintendo Switch Online. Obviously, it was a technical marvel back in the day and maybe a must-have for just what it could do for the Game Boy Color, but it doesn't hold up in relation to modern games today. So while I do think it's very impressive they originally ported this to Game Boy Color, really there's much better ways to play Alone in the Dark now, and I'm not sure it was a necessary inclusion, especially in the launch list for the Nintendo Switch Online Game Boy. So guys, like I said earlier, and I'll say again, while it is a technical marvel and really just an astonishing entry that it was ever on the Game Boy, it doesn't necessarily play well, and it's not one of my favorite games, and I hate to do this, but I have to give one rank in the D. So Alone in the Dark, although somewhat impressive, they could port it to the Game Boy, doesn't really hold up, and I would put it into the D rank. Moving on, we move on to a very popular Capcom Game Boy game. So popular, in fact, it spawned an entire series of games based on this character, Gargoyle's Quest. So for those of you not familiar, Gargoyle's Quest is a spin-off from the Ghosts and Goblins or Ghouls and Ghosts series. You remember the Red Devil that was in the original Ghouls and Ghosts and Goblins? The really irritating little creature. Well, this Gargoyle is a takeoff of that. You basically play as this character and move around on the screen. It has that wonderful Capcom Game Boy style that's both a blessing and a curse, featuring big, beautiful sprites, easy to see on screen. However, where they are zoomed in or cropped so much, it is hard to see sometimes where you're going on the screen and upcoming enemies, so keep that in mind. You'll notice the exact same thing with Game Boy Mega Man once you start playing it. Anyways, with Gargoyle's Quest, it applies the same rules of logic as the original Ghosts and Goblins. You get 2 hits, however it is easier to pick up power-ups and gain hearts back during the stage. You fire projectiles from the mouth with 1 button, and you can also jump and fly, which is a new dynamic with the other button. So flying, you have a limited wingspan, so you can press it and glide across the screen until that meter runs out. One of the other big key components that I really like as a play mechanic is you can also do a wall grab and wall jump that is reminiscent of Batman on the NES, the Sunsoft Batman, and also kind of like Ninja Gaiden. I think that's a very cool dynamic, but I do find it a little bit tricky sometimes because I jump and then when I glide and forget I have to press the jump button again to initiate my flying, and I just end up falling down. Anyways, this game is really, really fun. great looking, however, it is difficult. It is, after all, a Ghosts and Goblins spin-off, or Ghouls and Ghosts spin-off, so of course they've got to bring the difficulty with it. 2 hits and you're out, especially with the challenge of not being able to see what's coming up on screen, can be very tough. This one's a cult classic, everybody loves it. It's hard, but it's definitely worth your time playing. So guys, Capcom's Gargoyle's Quest, a definite, super fun game and great addition to the Nintendo Switch Online Game Boy library. I'm going to give it a high mark, not the highest mark though, and I will put it solidly in the B tier. And remember, for all those people who want to disagree and scream at me, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Moving on, we've got another Game Boy classic. I'm going to admit this one was released really after my time with the original Game Boy was kind of over and I moved on to more adult type things, but it's one of the best games on the Game Boy, Kirby's Dream Land. HAL Laboratories' Nintendo mascot Kirby comes to life in its first ever adventure on the Game Boy with Kirby's Dream Land. I don't remember owning this game, but I do remember working at a day camp as a counselor in training, and one of the kids brought their Game Boy to the camp one day and asked me to play it, and I sat down and played through the entire game in one sitting, and I was absolutely marveled at how good the game was. Again, it goes back to having really well drawn, big sprites that are easy to see. One of the prettiest games on the original Game Boy, obviously. Everything looks really good. It's designed really good. One of the things that caught me initially was you could kind of cheat in this game. I love the fact that when you jump and you hit the second jump, you can take in air and fly across the screen, which immediately grabbed my attention to let me know that I could just run through all the levels that way. Of course, sometimes you had to let your air out and go find specific things, but hey, for those of you that just want to fly through the levels, it's almost possible in this game. The other cool mechanic that you could do, of course, was eating characters and spitting them back out. So that plays into your play mechanics a lot. That's how you defeat enemies. Otherwise, Kirby is a super easy game, not very challenging. This is still probably one of the funnest. I've played just about every Kirby game after this, and this is still my favorite because I still think it packs the most enjoyment per minute. Kirby games can drag on at times, and I feel like I'm just going through the motions to finish them. This one still excites me and makes me feel like there is a definitive challenge and fun in order to play. I especially love the boss fights. The first boss fight against the tree gets me every time. What a wonderfully crafted game on the Game Boy. For people that say there are no good games on the Game Boy, I encourage you to play Kirby's Dream Land. So guys, Kirby's Dream Land, an easy but yet super fun and exciting game. One of the best games on the Game Boy, in my opinion. It's so good, it's going in the A tier. I can't put it in the S tier. It's not a super special game. It's just really, really good and worth your time. Check out Kirby's Dream Land. Moving on, we have Metroid II, The Return of Samus. Absolutely everybody loves Metroid II: The Return of Samus. For those of you Super Nintendo fans that bought the Super Game Boy, this game was plastered all over it, as this game was made for the Super Game Boy. The second Metroid game, I will tell you honestly, Metroid hadn't really caught my fancy at this point. It wasn't until Super Metroid that I truly fell in love with the series, and I go back to the original Metroid and some of the irritating things about that, like not really knowing where I am, screens looking a lot like they looked, constantly getting lost, and having the overworld map a little bit too big, and a lot of those factors from the original NES Metroid come into play here. There's so many amazing, just groundbreaking things that happen in Super Metroid that I always go back and compare those games to that, and this doesn't live up to this caliber. Of course, how could it? It was on the Game Boy. But for those of you that love the original NES Metroid, you're going to love this game too, because it retains all the really good things while taking a step forward in terms of graphic and story. In this Metroid game, it's a little bit different than the original. You land on a planet and you basically have to go find the lost Metroids on the planet. Each time you come in contact with a Metroid, your beeper will go off telling you you're getting closer and closer to the Metroid. Then the Metroid will appear and turn into different creatures that you have to attack and shoot down with your missiles. As you move along, you're going to find different items, different power-ups. We've all played Metroid games. We know what we got here. Anyways, it is a super fun game. All the original Metroid tropes play into it. It is a little bit more difficult than Super Metroid because of some of the original NES Metroid tropes, but definitely still worth your time and an amazing entry on the Game Boy library. So this is where people are going to get really mad at me, but I can't do it. Metroid II is an awesome game on the Game Boy, but because of some of the things I said in terms of not having some of the quality of life elements that Super Metroid does, and being a little bit too difficult to figure out where you are, and just some of the quirky play mechanics, I'm going to leave it in the A tier. It's definitely one of the premier games on the Game Boy, but it hasn't hit that special mark yet. Anyways, guys, moving on. Let's talk about the first official Mario Brothers entry in the series coming to the Game Boy. I'm surprised they went with this one instead of Super Mario Land 1. Super Mario Land 2, 6 Golden Coins. Arguably the better game, but I really like Super Mario Land 2. Super Mario Land 6 Golden Coins was a definite departure from the oddity that was Super Mario Land, moving to a more familiar Mario-style gameplay and really emulating what Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo was on the Game Boy itself. While this game isn't exactly a Super Mario World, continuance on the Game Boy and still retains some of the quirkiness of Super Mario Land 1, Super Mario Land 2, 6 Golden Coins, introduces new elements like the carrot to get the rabbit feather, and of course the introduction of Mario's frenemy. I don't know what you call him after this, but the enemy in the game is in fact Wario, and we will see Wario later on in this tier making list. But anyways, it's a super fun game. You have to collect the 6 golden coins to advance to the castle, take out Wario, and save Super Mario Land. Mario. I keep saying Mario. Forgive me, it's my Newfoundland accent. But anyways, you gotta find the 6 golden coins. You're gonna go do fun stuff, like go to this tree level. It has all the fun elements that you expect from a Mario Brothers game. You jump on enemies, get power-ups like the fireball to take people down, get new power-ups like I just mentioned with the rabbit ears, and of course, each world has a boss that is an absolute joy of a boss fight, which will give you one of your golden coins to finish the game. This was a truly special release on the Game Boy. I was so excited when it first came out. It was one of the first must-have games on the Game Boy, and I burnt so many batteries on it. Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins. It was fun portably, and it's super fun now on the Nintendo Switch. This is a special game, so it goes in the S tier. Now moving on, one of my favorite games of all time. I think we all know which tier this is going to go into. The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening DX. So the rumor I read once is that Link's Awakening is a product of some people trying to port The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past to the Game Boy, and because they were trying to do that, they decided to create their own game, and that's why we have Link's Awakening. I don't know if that is true, but there are certainly so many familiar elements from Link's Awakening that they managed to bring over to this Game Boy release. Much like a lot of other popular Nintendo series such as Super Mario Land, coming over from Bros and World. This one has a unique feel to it, and it's certainly quirky and an amazing entry into the Legend of Zelda series. While they couldn't do everything graphically they could do with A Link to the Past in the Super Nintendo, they certainly retained so much of the look in the miniature version on the Game Boy. The shading in green, I forget what the color is, chroma green or whatever it was, looked amazing, and it looks even better here on the Game Boy Color. The play mechanics are fantastic. Your top-down dungeon, it retains everything you expect from a Legend of Zelda game, from finding keys to grant you entry into the dungeons. Each of the dungeons have everything you could expect from keys, mid-tier enemies with warps back to the original stage. That's a new add thanks to the Game Boy entry. And of course, you're going to pick up a weapon that will aid you in your quest and help you get to the next stage in many cases, and the boss key, and then fight a boss to grab one of the Windfish instruments at the end. This is an awesome entry, so good in fact that Nintendo actually ported a version of this to the Nintendo Switch, gave it a modern look that retained all of the original play mechanics. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX is a must-play, one of the most special games for the Game Boy, and one of the fondest memories of my youth with my Game Boy, playing The Legend of Zelda. And with no further ado, guys, directly in the S tier, it's one of the best games on the Game Boy, if not the very best game on the Game Boy, and actually one of my favorite releases in the Legend of Zelda series altogether. I absolutely love this game. I'm so excited. It's on Nintendo Switch Online. Even though I already have the Nintendo Switch updated port, I'm still going to go back and play this version too, and I advise all of you guys to do the same. And then last but not least, we just talked about Super Mario Land. I gotta try to say it. Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins. I think I might have said it right there. And we talked about how the titular enemy was in fact Wario. Well, after Wario was in Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins, he got his own release. Here we're checking out Wario Land 3 for the Game Boy Color. So guys, if you've never played a Wario Land game before, do not expect a direct Mario type experience here, because this is a completely different game. While it does have some of the same looks and elements of Mario, Wario completely controls different. He has more of a rush type attack. He goes around and tries to find different hats that will grant him different powers. I really like this game, even though I've owned it portably. I've never really put a lot of interest into it until playing it to record footage for this list. And I will tell you, the game actually has some very unique elements. There's points where you'll get turned into other creatures for a limited time, such as being turned into a zombie. That's very reminiscent of Metal Slug for you arcade fans out there, when you get turned into mummies and zombies and that. So you get turned into, at one point, a jumping character that you actually need to be turned into to get a special coin in the level. So getting turned into other things is actually very interesting. The play mechanics are fun, but I will say it's kind of weird having to ram everything. It's an interesting action platformer, definitely something you should check out, but definitely not as good as a regular Mario Brothers game. Now, I have in fact owned and loved Wario Land for the Virtual Boy. I forget which one that is, but anyways, Wario Land 3 plays similar to that, same play mechanics. I think you guys will dig it. This is a very cool game on the Game Boy. So guys, a very good game, certainly not as good as your regular Mario release, so I will have to rank it pretty high, but it's definitely not as good as Kirby's Dream Land or Metroid II: The Return of Samus, but I do put it on the same rank as Tetris and Gargoyle's Quest, so I would rank it as a B. So as you can see there, guys, this is my ranking of the Game Boy games we got at launch for the Nintendo Switch Online. You've got your S tier, the best games, Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins, The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening DX. Your A tier, so these are must-plays, just not super special, in my opinion. Send all your hate in the comments, I know. Kirby's Dream Land, Metroid 2, The Return of Samus. You've got your B games that are really good. Definitely check out Tetris, Gargoyle's Quest, Wario Land 3, and then moving down here, Game & Watch Gallery is a combination of mini games. You can play the original Game & Watch versions or the updated versions, a lot of fun. Last but not least, Alone in the Dark, an absolute technical marvel at its times, but kind of a rough game to play nowadays. So guys, that's my ranking of the 9 launch titles for the Game Boy on Nintendo Switch Online. I think regardless of where you place the importance of these games, or whether or not you think Game Boy was a good addition, it's so cool that we now have access to Game Boy, whether you want to play it on your TV, or the fact you can actually take your Switch portably and play portable games like they were originally meant to be played. I mean, this is long overdue in my opinion. Having a handheld system like the Switch that's kind of, I don't know, like a hybrid where you can put it on the TV too, being able to take it, get up and go, and then you can play these games that were originally meant to be played portably. And we've got a pretty good launch list. As you can see, some absolutely super special games, some really good ones, and really out of the bunch, only one that doesn't really seem to fit because it hasn't held up over time. But maybe while you're playing it portable, you can get the same excitement that other people got when it was originally launched and look at it as the technical marvel it is. Anyways guys, let me know in the comments, what do you think of my ranking? Do you agree, disagree? What game do you think should have been put in a different place? Do you think I'm crazy about something? I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for Metroid II: The Return of Samus, I can't help that. Anyways guys, let me know in the comments. Thank you so very much for watching. This is Michael B. the Game Genie. I'll talk to you guys next time.